Tonight we're looking at Romans 4:14 and 15. Again, we're looking at this more with a topical interest as we are looking at our morning messages where Paul is talking to the church in Galatia. And as we have been looking at in the morning, Paul is really trying to give over the understanding of true faith and the genesis of true faith, the embracing and sustaining of true faith, and the growth and maturity of true faith, as opposed to allowing the enemies of true faith to take root in the hearts of people who want to be people of true faith, and allowing something that is a faith substitute to occupy our hearts and our minds and make us spin our wheels in religious circles, exercising faith substitute instead of exercising true faith. Is that all right? Is that all right? You know, when we go to restaurants nowadays, we have a choice for our sweeteners. Some of us are still sugar people. Now we know, the sugar we use ain't real sugar, but we're sugar people, and some of us are definitely sugar substitute people, and some of us are sugar substitute people by choice. But we should never be faith substitute people by choice. Especially when we have ministers like Paul who are earnestly trying to make sure that we know that there is a difference between true faith and what gets offered to us as a faith substitute. Is that all right? And one of the things that's going to help us understand not getting caught up in a faith substitute is understanding what the law was intended to do, what the law does, what the intended product of the law is, and what the consequential products of the law are. And I think that's what we start getting when we are looking at these passages in Romans that we're taking a look at. Is that all right? Now, Paul says in 14 and 15, chapter 4 Romans, "For if those who live by the law, or those who live by law, are heirs to the promise of God, heirs of the faith, then faith has no value. For if those who live by law are heirs, then the promise is worthless. And faith has no value, and the promise is worthless because law brings wrath. And where there is no law, there is no transgression." Again, going back to the statement that launched this particular series of messages, the law has a place in the plan of God just as much as faith has a place in the plan of God, and we just want to make sure we put it in the proper place. Is that all right? Now, here's the argument against the law, as Paul is stating here. The promise of the inheritance does not come through the law. What do we want? Do we want the circumstances and consequences, or do we want the promise of the inheritance? We want the inheritance. We want the inheritance. And so by our desire, that becomes an argument against the law, because we cannot pursue through the law what the law does not give. Amen? We've heard the cliche, you can't get blood from a turnip. Right? Right? Everybody, I'm a Judge Mathis guy. And so many times, the person over here is saying, they owe me money. And the person over here says, yeah, I owe them money, I ain't got it. Only reason I ain't paid them back is I ain't got it. What can I do? And Judge Mathis goes, you gonna pay them. but that's kind of, you can't get blood out of a turnip, where we cannot try to get from the law what the law cannot give, what the law was never intended to give. Is that all right? Now look at what Paul says. Paul says that the law voids faith. The law erases any hope of receiving the promise. Why? The reason is because the law demands perfection. Right? The law demands perfection. The law insists that it be obeyed. The law looks at you and the law says, you violate me, you break me, and you become guilty. And when I have you guilty, I got you where I want you, because once you're guilty, now you're condemned. And when you're condemned, I get to punish you. Right? Because what is written in the law. Punishment for violating the law. Right? Don't we threaten people? Well, no, we don't threaten. Don't we? Yeah, we threaten people. We threaten. If you do this, this is the consequence. If you don't do that, this is the consequence. There's no purpose of having a law if there is no deterrent. There has to be a negative consequence for violating the law for the law to attempt to be effective. Amen? And inherent with that also, if there is a consequence for violating the law, there then needs to be law enforcement. We've also said that. What good is a rule? What good is a law if there's nobody to enforce it? Amen? So you see all this other stuff that has to come along with law. So if I'm going to give you law, I'm going to give you the possible consequences of you becoming a lawbreaker. And I'm also going to give you the people who are going to try to enforce the law upon you and capture you if you don't follow the law. And then if I capture you, where am I going to take you? To the judge. Right? And the funny thing about it is, if we get deeper into Romans, we're going to see that the very law that holds itself up to be obeyed then tries to act as judge itself. The law tries to sentence you against what you violated against it. Amen? That's the equivalent, the civil equivalent of me being a vigilante, where I decide that you have wronged me, and so I become judge and jury and executioner. Amen? So the law demands perfection, and the law says that if you violate me, you're going to be guilty. If you're guilty, I'm going to condemn you, and when I condemn you, I'm going to punish you. And the problem is that we already know that no one is going to live perfectly righteous before God. Nobody can live perfectly righteous before God. Nobody has within their human ability to keep from coming short and breaking the law of God at some point. And if everybody at one point in their life breaks a law, then everybody at least at one point in their life, and if we're honest with ourselves, at many times in our life, everyone is a lawbreaker. Amen? So everybody is a lawbreaker. That means everybody is supposed to be condemned. That means everybody is supposed to be punished. And remember, we talked about this morning, that's where people start. Right? With the characteristics that we find in natural man. That's where people start. Amen? So we get to that's where people start. And if the promise of God's inheritance is through the law, comes by the law, then nobody is going to inherit the promise, because the promise is given only to the righteous, and no one is perfectly righteous. If the inheritance comes through the law, then no lawbreaker will ever receive the inheritance. Does that put any of us out of the category? Amen? Amen? Now I'm going to tell you the only benefit to being a lawbreaker. And I know we don't want to be rebels, but the only benefit to being a lawbreaker is that lawbreakers have the opportunity to be grace seekers.